I'm just going to throw a word out there, one word. And I want you to be honest with yourself about the immediate reaction you feel, right in your gut when you hear it. Ready? Woke.
Mm. Whoa.
Yeah.
Even just hearing it said out loud, it feels like the air in the room just changes.
It does, doesn't it? It's 2026, and I feel like that one syllable is, I don't know, heavier than lead.
Yeah.
It's carrying so much cultural baggage.
So much.
I almost hesitated to even bring it up because, depending on who's listening right now, that word is either a badge of honor, or it's a punchline, or a slur. It's a weapon.
It really is. It's the linguistic grenade of our decade. You
Yeah.
you pull the pin, you toss it into a conversation, and that's it. The actual exchange of ideas it stops.
Yeah.
It's become shorthand for everything I'm angry about or maybe everything I'm afraid of.
Which is exactly why, when I saw the source material for today, I have to be honest, I was a little skeptical. We were looking at an article by pastor and theologian Jameen Bradley.
Right.
And it's titled, Woke Like God, Why Holy Awareness Isn't a Political Insult. And my first thought was, okay, are we really going to try to reclaim this word? Is that even possible at this point? It feels like trying to unburn toast.
I had the same hesitation. I did. But Bradley isn't, he's not trying to win a Twitter argument here. He's doing something much more interesting.
Okay.
He's stripping away all the cable news commentary, and he's going back to the roots, both the historical roots of the word itself and, surprisingly, the theological roots of the actual concept.
And that's the curveball, isn't it? That he argues the instinct behind being woke, before it got co-opted by marketing departments and political campaigns, is actually deeply biblical.
Deeply. He's making the case that God might be the most woke being in existence.
Which I know that sounds like a provocation.
It does. It sounds like a headline.
Yeah.
But if you actually stick with his logic, it holds up in a really challenging way. This isn't about voting patterns. It's about, the nature of omniscience and the human tendency to close our eyes to things that make us uncomfortable.
Okay, so if we're going to do this, we have to be really precise. We can't just use the modern definition where woke means, I don't know, a corporate DEI seminar or a casting choice in a movie.
No, we have to go back.
We have to go back. And Bradley starts his whole argument with a history lesson that I think a lot of people have either forgotten or maybe never even knew.
Right. If you ask the average person today where woke comes from, they might say a hashtag from 2020 or
campus protests.
Campus protests, yeah, in the 2010s. But Bradley takes us back 80 years. He anchors the term in the Black vernacular of the 1940s.
The 1940s, so we're talking pre-Civil Rights Act. Jim Crow is the law of the land in the South.
Exactly. And the context here is absolutely vital. In the 1940s, for a Black person in America, being unaware of your surroundings, of the social dynamics, the unwritten rules of a segregated town.
Did you get killed?
It could literally get you killed. It wasn't a metaphor. No. When phrase "stay woke" began to circulate, it wasn't some kind of performative signal of virtue. It was a survival tactic. It meant, very simply, do not sleep through oppression.
Do not sleep through oppression.
It was a warning to recognize that the systems around you were dangerous and you needed to be alert to navigate them.
That's a haunting definition. It implies that the default state of the world, or at least the comfortable world, is to be asleep to that danger.
And that is exactly where the shift happens. Bradley points out that over the decades, the definition broadened. It went from a specific survival warning for Black Americans to a more general call to be aware of all types of social injustice.
But as it got broader, it got thinner.
Yes, it got commodified, and then eventually it got weaponized.
Bradley calls it a political container. I thought that was a really useful image.
It's the perfect description. He argues that for a lot of conservatives today, the word woke has nothing to do with that 1940s definition. It's just a bucket. It's a bucket where you throw ideologies I don't like.
If you don't like a policy, it's woke. If you don't like a book.
It's woke. And once it's in the bucket, you don't have to engage with it.
Right.
And that's the danger Bradley highlights. If someone cries out in pain, if they say, I am hurting, the system is crushing me, and you label that cry as woke, well, you've effectively categorized it as bad politics.
Which gives you permission to ignore the pain.
Exactly. You don't have to listen to the plea because you've already decided it's just a political maneuver.
And that really seems to be the crux of the human problem he's getting at. It's not just about the language, it's about a refusal to see. And this is where he pivots into the theology. He brings up the cycle of sleep from the book of Judges. Now, I grew up going to Sunday school, and I remember Judges being incredibly violent and chaotic, But I don't remember a cycle of sleep.
It's a thematic cycle. I mean, if you read Judges, you see this pattern repeat over and over and over.
It's frustrating to read.
It's so frustrating because the Israelites are so predictable. They're faithful for a little while, then they get comfortable. They fall asleep to justice, to God's commands. They drift into apathy.
And then the consequences hit.
Right. Oppression comes, usually in the form of some foreign king or a warlord. They suffer.
Yeah.
And in their suffering, they finally wake up.
They cry out to God.
They cry out to God. God hears them, raises up a deliverer, a judge to rescue them. They get saved. They stay awake for maybe a generation, and then
You hit the snooze button.
every single time. And Bradley's point is that this isn't just an ancient Jewish problem, it's the human condition. We have this, gravitational pull toward apathy.
It's exhausting to stay awake.
It's exhausting. It's painful to look at the world's brokenness all the time. So the moment things feel okay for us personally, we drift back to sleep.
And this connects to something else you mentioned about American history, right? This idea of generational amnesia.
Yes. And this part hits hard. Bradley notes that every generation looks back at the sins of the past. Slavery, segregation, the Holocaust, and thinks,
I would never have done that.
I would never have done that. If I lived back then, I'd have been one of the good guys. I would have been awake. We all love to believe that. It's comforting.
Of course.
But Bradley says it's a delusion. The people who committed those atrocities or the people who just stood by and watched, they were just like us. They weren't monsters. They were asleep.
They had normalized it.
They had normalized the horror around them. And because we think we've fixed society, we assume we're immune to that same blindness. We think we've arrived, which is the sure sign that we're actually drifting off.
So waking up requires an active, intentional effort. It's not our default state. But then how do you actually do it? Because if I'm asleep, by definition, I don't know that I'm asleep.
That's the catch. You can't wake yourself up in a vacuum. Bradley argues that you have to put down your defenses. You have to rely on voices from outside your own experience. He writes that we often have to hear pain before we can see it with our own eyes.
That's a really specific distinction. Hearing before seeing.
Well, it makes sense, though, doesn't it? If you benefit from a system or if you're just, sheltered from its jagged edges, you literally cannot see the problem. It's invisible to you.
Okay.
The only way you find out it exists is if someone who is being cut by those edges tells you. And for you to wake up, you have to believe them. You have to value their testimony over your own comfort.
Which brings us to the title of the article and the part that I think will probably challenge a lot of people. Woke like God. Now, I have to push back on this a little. It sounds like he's taking a modern, charged political term and just retroactively pasting it onto God to make a point. Isn't that a bit of a stretch?
I thought so too at first. I really did. But if you look at the attributes, if we strip the word woke back to that original 1940s definition, being aware of oppression, seeing injustice, then who fits that description better than an omniscient deity?
Because God sees everything.
God sees everything. God is the only being in the entire universe who is never asleep, never distracted, never biased. There is no act of violence, no whisper of abuse, no systemic crushing of the poor that God does not witness.
Wow.
Bradley's argument is that God is, by his very nature, hyper-aware of injustice. He cannot sleep through oppression because he is everywhere.
So if God sees all the pain that I'm ignoring, then my ignorance isn't really bliss. It's just distance.
Exactly. Bradley calls this awareness a holy quality, and this reframes the whole debate. He's saying that if you claim to follow God, you're claiming to follow a being who is, obsessed with justice and awareness.
So striving to be woke.
Therefore, striving to be woke in that original sense of seeing the pain of your neighbor is actually an attempt to be more like God. It's a spiritual discipline, not a political posture.
That puts a very different spin on the church's role in all of this. Instead of fighting against wokeness, he's suggesting the church should be the most awake place on earth.
Theoretically, yes, but we all know that's rarely the case. And he doesn't leave this in the abstract. He shares a story from his own ministry that I think really grounds the whole concept. It's about an older woman in his congregation.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because this wasn't a seminar or a lecture. This was a real moment of genuine realization.
Right. So this was around the time George Floyd was killed. Tensions were high, and Bradley's church decided to show some documentary specials about the history of the church and racism in America.
Okay.
And you have to imagine the setting. This isn't a rowdy protest. It's a church sanctuary or a fellowship hall. It's quiet.
And this woman, she's older. She's probably seen a lot of history in her lifetime.
She has. And she sits there watching this documentation of lynching, of segregation, of the church's complicity in its silence. And Bradley describes her reaction. She wasn't angry. She wasn't
I
defensive.
wasn't reciting talking points.
Not at all. She was on the verge of tears.
And she said something that I think is the key to this whole deep dive.
She whispered, "I didn't know this was happening."
I didn't know.
That right there is the sound of waking up. It's not a triumph. It's a grief. It's a realization that suffering was happening right alongside you, and you missed it.
Yeah.
And Bradley identifies that moment, that breaking of the heart, as the work of the Holy Spirit.
That's so interesting because usually when people talk about the Holy Spirit convicting them, they mean they felt bad about, lying to their spouse or cheating on their taxes. Personal sins.
Right, individual morality. But Bradley's expanding that. He's saying the Spirit also convicts us of social blindness. When that woman said, "I didn't know," that was the Spirit removing the scales from her eyes. She wasn't just learning history, she was having a spiritual encounter with the truth of her neighbor's pain.
But, and this is the hard reality, not everyone reacts like that woman. I mean, for every person who says, "I didn't know," and weeps, there are 10 people who get angry that you even brought it up.
And this is where Bradley connects the modern resistance to wokeness to the ancient resistance to the prophets, and specifically to Jesus.
Jesus, the disturber of the peace.
We love the Jesus who hugs children. We often forget the Jesus who made people so furious they literally wanted to throw him off a cliff.
Right.
Bradley points out that Jesus was a prophet. He called out religious hypocrisy. He pointed out how the poor were being exploited by the temple systems. He was constantly trying to wake people up to the reality of God's kingdom versus the corrupt systems of the day.
And the response was not a standing ovation.
No, he was killed. Cancellation in the first century involved a cross, not, a Twitter ban. But the point stands. People hate being woken up. Just think about it physically. When you're in a deep sleep and someone shakes you awake or flips on the bright lights, what's your first reaction?
Irritation. Anger. I want to swat the hand away and pull the covers back up.
Exactly. We protect our sleep. And societies protect their sleep even more aggressively. And Bradley notes that Jesus used a very specific phrase over and over in his ministry. Those who have ears, let them hear.
I've heard that 1,000 times. I always just assumed it meant, listen up.
It's deeper than that. Bradley interprets it as a spiritual invitation. It implies that the sound waves are hitting everyone's eardrums, but not everyone is hearing.
Oh.
A signal is being sent, the prophet is speaking, the oppressed are crying out, but there's a spiritual blockage.
So having ears to hear is a choice.
It's a willingness. It's a willingness to let the uncomfortable truth actually penetrate your heart. Bradley suggests that the Spirit is always trying to wake us up to the words, but we have the capacity to refuse. We can choose to remain deaf because hearing would cost us too much.
It would cost us our comforts.
Our comfort, our politics, maybe even our friends.
That reframes the whole culture war around this word then. It suggests that the resistance we see, the anger, the banning of books, all this legislation against certain discussions, it might be a form of spiritual defense mechanism.
That's it.
It's a way of making sure we don't have to hear things that would require us to change.
It's the cycle of judges in real time. We're fighting to stay asleep.
So where does this leave us? Because I'm guessing Bradley isn't telling everyone to go out and register for a specific political party.
No, not at all. And that's the critical distinction he makes at the end. He is very clear. He says, the call to get woke is not a call to embody everything political wokeness has now become. He separates the package from the impulse.
That's helpful, because I think a lot of people feel like if they admit that, say, systemic racism is real, they suddenly have to agree with every single policy proposal from the far left.
Or they have to use language they don't understand.
Right.
And Bradley says no. You can reject the political baggage. You can disagree on policy. You can critique the excesses of activist culture. But, and this is the big but, you cannot reject the command to see.
You can't hit the snooze button on someone else's pain.
You cannot deny the reality of the pain. The prophetic message, according to Bradley, is just this simple. There is pain and suffering in this world, and it's now time to wake up to it and address it. How you address it might be different from how I address it. We can debate the solutions.
But we aren't allowed to debate the reality of the suffering itself.
That's what he's saying.
That feels like a much more sustainable place to land. It moves the conversation from, are you a liberal or a conservative, to are you awake or are you asleep?
It challenges that compartmentalization we love so much. We want to keep our spiritual life in a nice, neat box on Sunday morning and our social and political views in a totally separate box.
Yeah.
And Bradley is just saying, no. If you worship the God of justice, those boxes have to merge. You can't be spiritually awake and socially asleep.
It's terrifying, honestly, because if I admit I might be asleep to something, then I have to go looking for it, and I don't know what I'm going to find.
That's the risk.
Yeah.
But that's also the invitation. The cycle of judges only breaks when the people finally wake up.
Well, this has certainly been more than just a word association game. We've gone from 1940s survival tactics all the way to the nature of God, with a stop in the violent history of ancient Israel.
It's just a reminder, that language is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the buzzwords, there are usually these ancient human struggles playing out.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this analysis, we want to leave you with a question. We talked about the idea that waking up is simply the act of seeing pain that you previously ignored.
And we talked about how easy it is to use political annoyance as an excuse to just keep our eyes closed.
So here is the question for you to carry into your week. If the definition of being awake is simply seeing the pain of others, what current suffering might you be sleeking through right now, simply because you don't like the political baggage that's attached to the alarm clock?
That's the one. What truth are you hitting snooze on?
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.